When this piece is so emotional because when George Floyd was killed, I couldn't paint. My children couldn't play. I couldn't do anything. So this is the first one that I did about the children, just sitting. And they couldn't jump rope anymore. And these children would not jump anymore. So the ropes are on the sidewalk. This represents that fence that's always in front of federal buildings. And if you look real close, you'll see the American flag hanging down in mass. So if you look at the faces of my children, you'll see that they're sad. And this little guy here is he's kind of a child that you would say is not as strong as the rest of the children. So he's sitting on his sister's lap. So the ropes will remain here. They won't jump rope again. This particular piece here is about a little girl named Mary Jones. And Mary and I was in school, on a 4-room school together, and she used to walk to school. And when she walked to school, her little socks would be wet. And if you look close, you'll see her little feet have the socks and they're all tattered. And she put a hand inside of her sleeve of her clothes to try to get them warm. And the teacher would put her in the back of the room by that old heater with the coal stove. Mary would smile when you go near her, and she had the prettiest little laugh and little soft kind of brownish hair, and that cough would come when she would laugh, and it would go deeper and deeper. And Mary went home one day and she didn't come back to school because that cough was pneumonia. She died in her sleep from pneumonia. But Mary travels with me everywhere I go, from that 2nd grade class all the way till now. So she's a special person to me. This would have been the high school that I attended. Plato Price High School is not there anymore. It started out with the 4-room school, which was called Rosenwald, and Reverend Davison was the principal then. And the next principal for the Plato Price School was G.E. McKeithen, and the last principal was Mr. Jimmy Clark. I was in the last class that graduated in 1961 from Plato Price High School. And if you look close, you'll see some of the achievements that we made from that school. We didn't have a gym. We didn't have a lab. But from that school, Mel Watt, which is a state senator, went to that school. And this is Mel right here. And this is Mel right here. And this is Mel right here. So Mel was quite an achiever, as many other students. Eddie Hoover became head of the medical department for the state of New York. In that school, they had no lab. Miss Powell was the first graduate from the class when they let women go to Biddle's school, that was a theological seminary that we know now as Johnson C. Smith. And this is my class here, the last graduating class in 1961, that class right there. School is closed now. The grounds are now houses for Habitat. And we're trying to get them to allow us to have a library put or something in that area for those children who are there now, so that they can become as successful or even more successful with us than we were. May Day. May Day was a fun time. Now they call it, I think they call it Physical Education Day or something like that. We had May Day and the parents would come, and you're always going to have somebody's child that's going to mess up. And they supposed to wrap that maypole and he goes wrong. All right, the entire exhibition is dedicated to Fanny Dolores Waterman. This would have been Fanny when she was a little girl. Fanny was the person that integrated our schools in Charlotte. She was the second person to go, but she was the first to go and graduate. All white school, and the first school that she attended was Alexander Street, 7th Street School. And this is Fanny Dolores right here and here. Her father would take her to school. They lived on a street called Long Street that ran through Charlotte from one of the wards, and that street is not there anymore. And Fanny had just a few little things written about her, but I felt it very necessary because this entire show is about women and children. We so often forget about the women, and without the women we cannot have a tomorrow. And I look at us as being the foundation of everything, because underneath you got to have a foundation, and I look at women as being the foundation of whatever you're going to have. Without a foundation you can't have the building. But most people look at the building first and they never look what the foundation is or was made of. And that's why I dedicated this whole exhibition to Fanny Dolores Waterman. Her father taking her to school, she had to take her lunch, couldn't eat in the cafeteria. She couldn't take gym because had she gone in the locker room, they would have beaten her. This little part here is of her teacher who taught history and geography. Back then they were still saying that black folk had tails. And when she got to that part, Fanny says she got up and walked out of the classroom, and of course she was upset to be saying, to hear that her teacher's telling the class that we have tails. And you'll see her hand is extremely big there. I intended to make it big because that teacher would drop her paper on the floor and she'd have to reach down on the floor and pick up her paper. These are some of the classmates that she had, and you can see Fanny way up there, one little chocolate person in that classroom. Fanny is now 81 years old. And the story about Fanny has never been told. To know that the person Dorothy counts is all in your history books, but this one little girl went to school the entire Charlotte area are happening now. This piece I did, and if you notice, some of my pieces have umbrellas over them, and the umbrella represents protection. Protection from the sun, protection from the rain, and that's what little brother's doing for his little sister. And this fabric here was in my mom's things from the 30s. It was a quilt, and it was all tattered. And what a wonderful way to preserve it. Rather than to toss it, I put it in a piece of art. Miss Banner Watt. Miss Banner Watt, everybody laughed at Miss Banner. But guess what? Miss Banner had money. Down in her bosom, she kept money. And in her pocket, she had money. And here's a real piece of a feed sack that was the feed sack that housed the pig's feed. Pig feed sacks weren't pretty, had lettering on it, and this is a piece of an old feed sack, and I have fabric put over that because they would patch it, didn't toss it, but they used it for something else. Voting. You know, I didn't know that any of this would mean anything to history, because this works were done before Kamala was given the opportunity to run as a president for our future. But it must be something in the divine intervention, or whatever you put it as. So I did voting. And this voting piece was done in 23. And there was a club in my neighborhood called the Friendly Few. And I think there is one person still living now that was in that club. And these women were born in the early 1900s. And I can remember at one of the eulogies for one of the ladies, the young lady said, these women saw a lot. They remember when black women could not vote. But when they were able to vote, she said, they put on their Sunday best, their stockings and their best shoes and their pocketbook and hats. And then she said they were all ready, very ready. Aunt Sadie had a ice pick in her pocketbook. Somebody else had a hammer in their pocketbook. They were ready. Because don't forget, they'd never voted before, and they didn't know what was going to happen. People laugh when I say that they were ready. Ironing board. My mom had a old board that she covered with feed sack, and she used 2 chairs to iron, make up her ironing board. And she had an old wood stove with that hot iron, so hot you couldn't hold it with your hand. No steam coming from it, not like today's iron. And she would iron clothes right there in the kitchen. Self-explanatory. Old pots on the wall, jelly jam on shelves. A timepiece, we didn't call them clocks. Timepiece was somewhere in the house. This one is an honorable piece as well. Very few people know about Augusta Savage. Augusta Savage was born in 1892, and she was born in a little town called Green Cove Springs, Florida. She was an artist from a little girl about 4 years old. She would make clay ducks all over the yard. When her siblings, she was, by the way, number 7 of 14 children. Her father was a minister. And she would make these little ducks all over the yard. And if you can see the dirt all on her little feet. And when she grew up, she put a piece of her work in a fair. And the man saw what skills she had and suggested that she go to New York and see how well she could do there, and she did. If you look at her picture, it doesn't look like she was born that early. She married when she was in Florida, had 1 child. Her husband lived and died a couple of years after their marriage. And when she went to New York, she left her daughter home with her family, her mom and dad. And in New York, she decided she wanted to go study in a top art school in Paris. And they accepted her at first, and then they wrote back and said, no, we can't have you because we're not prepared for a colored woman. And so of course she was hurt by it, and she wrote letters, and the letters allowed her to get a chance to study in that school in Paris. And she came, and during that time she did a piece called Gammon, and that's her favorite, very famous piece. And coming back to New York, she lived in Harlem. She taught school. In fact, she taught Romeo Bearden. She taught Jacob Lawrence. Jacob Lawrence was one of her students. And the Harlem Renaissance started right in her living room. And she was famous for Gammon. And then she did a harp that was honoring Lift Every Voice and Sing, and it was bigger than life size at the World's Fair. And when the fair was over, she had no way to move it, so it had to be destroyed, and there are no pieces of it left. Although there were some small pieces that she had made to give to people, and those are the ones that you see now. But you can see there is a piece of sculpture that she did as well. And she taught until she moved upstate New York and she passed. But because of her, Harlem Renaissance is now still a part of our art world. Children playing on the porch, mama's old porch. Boy took old dog in the house and got to get him out before they find out he's in there, because when I grew up, you didn't put the dogs inside. Cotton picking. Here's another piece of mama's old apron, and all of the sacks are from feed sack. And people bending over, and when I grew up, people's bodies looked like humps in the field, bending over, picking cotton with both hands. I sometimes think of those times when people would pick cotton and it would be wet, and it's going to weigh more, but for the person who the farm belongs to, it makes it where the cotton is not as valuable when it's wet because it'll mildew, and the class of cotton can't be used for anything when it mildews. So you can take the seed out and use it for the next year, or put the damaged part in between a quilt, and that was what they used in a lot of the old quilts. Water is important. Ladies going home after the storm, and this too is a piece of my mama's clothing. This piece of fabric came from Vermont, and they're looking at the village going home. I love music. I love music. Music makes me happy. The sound of the drums, the sound of the guitar, the sound of the piano. The piano, by the way, is one of my favorite instruments. So I love music. This is paper on that girl's dress. I think somebody invited me to their house, and I liked the napkin, and I put it in my pocket and put it on that child's dress. Bathing in the tub, in the kitchen. Grandma's gonna get you real clean. More music. You don't see many girls playing a banjo, but she has banjo lessons. Too many children on the piano bench. You can remember having an old upright piano in people's houses, and all the children get on the bench, and everybody's child think that they can play, and they're just doing this with all 10 fingers.
You know, I don't remember. I probably do. I just don't remember.
Drawing water by the well. Courting by the well. And by the way, this is a little piece of fabric that is feed sack. A doily that was in my mom's sofa, and that's her hand stitching right there in that little doily. Chickens, always important for the eggs and for the meat if you can get it. I can hear the wheel of that old well turning. It had a squeaky sound. Getting your hair combed on the porch, hollering ouch, with all that thick hair that grandma or mom is getting ready to comb that hair, and she doesn't stop even if you say ouch. And hydrangeums. Every old house had hydrangeums in the yard, and roses with the old oak tree. And I'll tell you what those birds resemble when I get around to the last piece in the back. Children's choir, everybody's child. everybody's child there on Wednesday evening, folk think that their child has the best voice. Out of tune many times like the piano, but children's choir. This one took me forever to finish because of its emotion, Mama and Me. When Charlotte's first train was built, it was on Trade Street and it ran flat to the street. And when we would come out of the station, I would say to my mom, "Mom, you hear the train coming?" And she would quietly say, "Mm-hmm." And when that train would come and it would stop, it would go shh. And the big old thing looked like a big monster standing there, black, with the smoke coming from the top and the side wheels that had all that metal, and it was so pretty. I didn't know what it meant, but it had all of that work on those wheels. To me, it looked like a piece of art. Well, anyway, we get on that train. This represents that old train. We get on the train and have people on the train in empty seats. And Mama had a duffel bag and a tin suitcase that I still have, the tin suitcase, and I try to sit in those empty seats. And she would just kind of bump me along until we got to where we were to sit. And needless to say, the train would have come from south of Charlotte, probably South Carolina or someplace, and the seats were filled, so Mama would set her suitcase down. I don't remember her putting it up. And I would sit on that duffel bag, and I had a red book. It had a little bit of everything in that book. In 1945 was when that book was written. And I carried it everywhere in the yard. It get wet. You put it in the sun, and the pages would stick, and I still kept that book. Anyway, we get on that train, and Mama had nowhere to sit. I sit on the duffel bag from Charlotte to Winston, and Mama would stand against the wall like this all the way, and the train would just rock all the way till we got to Winston-Salem. And she would be all dressed up in her best shoes that laced up, her stocking that she wore and put the knot on the side, and her hat, and her pocketbook, her Sunday best. And this represents those empty, pretty seats that we could not sit in because we were colored folk. School, that old yellow bus, it was really a yellow-orange, heavy, deep color. White children on that bus. My children are on the other side of this fence that shows the division of education. White children on that side, I'm on this side of the fence. My friends are walking to school. Sometimes they were taunted, but they would walk to school for the same reason these children are going to school, for education. Like I said, I'm dedicating this exhibition in my simple, small way to people that you don't know. And Aunt Sadie was one of those people. Her name was Sadie Stowe Reed. Everybody called her a seamstress, but she was more than a seamstress because she tailored suits for men, and she made costumes for the children who were of dance companies for North Carolina, South Carolina, and parts of Virginia. Aunt Sadie would sit in the back of Lebo's store, which was across the street from Belt Department Store, downtown Charlotte, and she made every one of those costumes by herself for years. That's Aunt Sadie way up there. Aunt Sadie is there, her daughter is there, and that's me in the middle. I had come home from North Carolina Central, and those are her nephews, and the nephew's mom is there. And this was a lady who I admired. Miss Mary Henderson worked for the Goodmans. Al Goodman's was an exclusive shoe store in Charlotte and catered mainly to the white community of people. The lettering inside the shoes was written, the size, the name of the shoe, and all of that was handwritten with a black pen. And Miss Mary would wear tall black patent leather shoes, and she wore a black patent leather belt, and she looked so elegant. And although we went to a church in the country that sat on rocks, they call them pillows, and you could see under it, had no indoor plumbing, it had a well outside. Miss Mary went to that church, and she looked so pretty. I always wanted to look like Miss Mary when I grew up. And this is a piece drawing that I found in some of the things that Aunt Sadie gave me. She didn't have an electric sewing machine at first, and later she got an electric sewing machine. And this pattern, if you can tell, it's an old pattern, and it only cost 75 cents. Now those patterns are like, what, $19 up? I went to a 4-room school that was precious to me. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grades. And in the hallway when you walked in, it was a big old ice box that the man came in, and he brought ice. I don't know how often during the week, but he brought ice because the ice box was not electric. And they would set a tray of donuts on top, because Krispy Kreme was down on Trade Street, and somebody would bring Krispy Kreme donuts, and I think they were a nickel. And we had an old pump outside, and the little boys would prime the pump by going up and down like this. And because at first the water was rusty red, and then when it got clear, you put your hand under it or a cup and you drank from this old pump. And of course there's a village nearby, and always usually church. At first Rosenwald Schools was used for a church as well as the school during the week. This piece is honoring my biological family. By the way, I am considered one of the oldest black folk who was legally adopted in Mecklenburg County. My friends say that they're 81, but I turn around and say I'm 18. Next year I'll be 28, they'll be 82, and I'll be able to legally drink. My great-grandfather was Robert Caldwell. He grew up on the land by the Davidson College area. His ancestors made some of the first bricks that built Davidson prestigious college. Well, when he became 19, he purchased land from the man who had his brother enslaved, and on that land had gold, and he had horses that he used to build some of the roads that we ride on now in Mecklenburg County. So he was a person that took his gold to be minted at what we know now as the Mint Museum. Okay, this piece here, Generations of Family Reunion. This starts when Grandma, Grandpa, old dog on the porch, children and mom and dad, and that protection that the man has over his family, the umbrella, and they are being greeted by the elders. And at the reunions we have fish in the wash pot, churning ice cream, music, women sitting at the table talking about everybody, and men want to start to laugh. Well, I didn't leave them out because they gossip more than us, and they playing cards and bending their arm, and you know what they're doing when they bend their arm. And then you have children playing again, and somebody's tired, they went to sleep on that old quilt. Gunji woman. Gunji woman was an important person in the country that my people came from, which is the continent of Africa. And she was a medicine woman. I never showed this piece. It's from 1999, and I started painting in 1998. Doula. This one, again, I'll say, is just supposed to be, because I had no idea that the controversy would come back up with what women could do with their bodies, and which is birth, and having children, and being able to determine what you're going to do with your body. I didn't know that was going to come up, but I did this in honor of the doula. Childbirth. The woman's got a hand under her tummy, and women coming to help with the water there, and going to carry on what is to be done in bringing that little new person into this universe. Women selling watermelons on the street. I love watermelon. You remember when watermelons used to be this big? Well, now they're like this. People say they are delicious, but I ate so much as a child, I'm allergic to them now. But they're sitting on the side of the road selling watermelon. Music. I love music. What can I tell you? Old music sheets. Nina Simone is one of my favorites. And the piece on the piano there, my skin is black, my arms are long, my hair is woolly, my back is strong enough to take the pain again and again. That is one of my favorite pieces, as well as a few others that she played during her lifetime. I admired her. I admired her so much, I wish I could have met her. Did go to one of her concerts that she only played one piece and walked off the stage because people were talking. Music, that big old bass, that big fiddle, whatever you want to call it, music. I love music, what can I tell you? I'm honoring women, people, because of women is where we are now. We played an important role in many people's lives, but have never been told our true story. This represents Queen Charlotte, who was a key person in the life of Mozart. And if you were able to have good eyes and get real close, this has many of his concertos that he did when she was in the room with him to help him to do them. And she played harp. People always say that Queen Charlotte was born in Germany. That's true. And they say she was not a part of the African American people. That is not true, because her parents were born in Kenya. And I represented it by putting a corn of Kenya, an old corn, on her finger as a ring. And she played a big important part in our city of Charlotte, and she also cultivated the plant bird of paradise, which came from Africa, and it is around today for us to see and enjoy. Harpists. You don't see many African American women playing harp. Very few black women playing harps, but I'm doing an honor to those harpists who play that beautiful sound of an instrument. And I also did homage to Augusta Savage, who was the person that I spoke about earlier, who did the piece Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is the Negro National Anthem. So I did that in honor of Augusta Savage with that harp. I think 42 keys. John Coltrane, I just had to put him there because he played many things that I love. These are a few of my favorite things: Blue Notes, Giant Steps, All, Nothing at All, A Love Supreme. Those are some of the songs I listen to when I begin to do the work that I do. I live back here. When my friends came, he said, I'm colorblind, I don't see nothing but green and blue. I said, but I live right back there. That's kind of how I live. This is a piece of fabric that is feed sack, chicken feed sack. And that would probably be me with my mom and I going home. I also love flowers, so you see flowers in a lot of my work. I had to honor Mother Earth, standing on top of the world with all of the children around her. Native American child, African American child, an African child, a Caucasian child, German child, children of all nations. That's how we're supposed to be able to live. All of us locked together like those children are on that piece. My children playing in the flowers, naughty or not, all of them out there playing in the flower gardens, going to school, playing in those flowers again. These pieces here I did when I came back from Ghana. And children in Ghana wear uniform. And they call the schools their government schools. And they all wear the same uniform at that school. And if it's a different school, they wear a different uniform. And they look like little baby soldiers going to school with their beautiful, colorful uniforms on, made from African fabrics of whatever area they live in. And you never see the same fabric when you look at the people walking, just daily work. Nobody wears the same thing. And by the way, all of this fabric came from Ghana. It was given to me by the lady in the house where we lived. This represents a black queen, self-explanatory, with her children and her husband out there getting food for his family. And a family from Charlotte who East Indians came up to see the exhibition. And I was quite honored. The lady walked up and she said, "This is fabric from my country." And I said, "Yes." Not knowing again that the lady who just represented people would run for our nation's president, India and Africa. More people from Ghana looking just like the women in Ghana, looking like models, walking very, very straight with food on their head, water on their head, or whatever commodities they needed to carry home. Is it hot? This one is special to me. This is one of my old pieces on this door. On that blackboard are members of my class, the things we had to learn. They call it reading, writing, music, arithmetic, spelling, geography. And then when we would finish everything, we had a time, we'd have free time. We weren't allowed to get up out of our seats, so I would draw on scrap paper and pass it across the room. Sometimes get in trouble because the guys would throw it across the room. But that's what we did in our spare time, especially if it was raining outside. And that would have been in a 4-room school. And on here is a poem that I learned in 2nd grade. And that poem goes, where we walked to school each day, and then we used to say Indian children, now we say Native American children or indigenous children used to play, all about our native land, where the shops and houses stand. Not a church, not a steeple, only woods and indigenous people. Only wigwams on the ground because there were none of us around. And there are other verses that you can look it up and find. And this would have been September 1949. And that's the kind of classroom we sat in, and door would be open because we didn't have air conditioning. Flowers from somebody's yard or from a field of some wild flowers, and give it to the teacher and she'd put it on her desk. Voting again. This piece was done before the other piece was done. This was done 2019. And here's a feed sack again, that famous feed sack that I pay homage to because it's been around more than 80 years. Important because we talk about recycling. Chicken feed came in there. My mama would wash it out, bleach it, because Clorox wouldn't even take the color out. And she'd put something in the water called bluing and make that water blue, hang it out on the line, and it would flap into the wind till it was dry. It has been around all that time. These women are at the voting table, taking the children to learn to vote. Always somebody is not clear, and it's that bunch down there, this old lady trying to tell her, you really need to vote. Many people don't know about Naomi Sims, who was a designer and a model, and she modeled for Yves Saint Laurent. And she did it back in the early 1950s. She was very popular. And so I paid homage to her, and she has part of my hair that I painted black on it. New Orleans. I went to New Orleans, and the sound of the music in the street in a regular day, I can hear it ringing in my ears now. The other piece that I did, my dentist has. And of course that town is a very famous place with all of its architectural design from the French as well as Spanish people. Piece of Mama's Apron again, man and woman dancing a jig. I went to a place in Charlotte that they call a juke joint. And when we were kids, we couldn't go in there. But in the juke joint, they would be in there dancing and having a good time. And I just felt that from that little piece of Mom's Apron. This has a sheet that was on the front of a cover of a music book. And I just felt a need to use it. 75 cents. The family again. Grandmother is honored. And in the country of Ghana, elders are widely honored. They don't drive when they get to be a certain age. Someone take them everywhere they go. So I thought about that when I did that piece. This one, I paid homage to a lady who I worked with who is no longer here. And her husband and she moved up into Maga Valley, which is the mountain area. And he told her, no one's here but us, so why don't we dance in the light of the moon? And that's why I did that piece. Women walking at night in Ghana. And by the way, the sun goes down at 6:30 every day because they are near the equator. If you turn around and stay for a second and look, it's gone. My great-grandson and his cousin and his friend. I just thought it was such a neat thing to think of those little guys. They were outside playing. When I was at North Carolina Central, I came home with this lady and her 3 daughters in her car, and my father was bent over with my oldest daughter, bending down to look at something on the ground, and they were so engulfed with whatever was crawling on the ground, they never looked up to see that I was out there. And I did that in homage to her, who is no longer here. Old piece jump rope, 2017. Enjoy, because the children won't be jumping rope. They'll be jumping, but they won't jump the rope. This one makes me have to take a deep breath. This is an old piece. It's an homage to the Birmingham 4 girls. There is a 5th girl who didn't make it to Sunday school that morning because she was late. And when the police came to her mom's house to tell her that what had happened down at the church, Mom kept stepping from side to side to keep her from getting out. And she kept hearing her mom make these strange sounds. And that would be her trying to get to the church. That Sunday morning, those girls' lives were lost for nothing. And that's why I did the little brown sparrow. It was called American brown sparrow, but there are none left. Only the one in taxidermist's office is stuffed, because people just killed them because there were so many. And they were just around, and they just killed them, and there are none left. So I put him there because it symbolizes these little girls whose lives were lost for no reason, nothing. And this would be that little girl who was left, who is still alive, coming out of the church. And she has a piece of each of her friends' dress in her hand with that red dull rose there, and a little bit of plasma that represents the lives lost. And if you look real close, you'll see the silhouettes of her little friends' spirits in the back of her. And that old brown sparrow sitting on the stoop out there by that church. And this is her running free with the symbol of her friends in the sky with that old brown sparrow. And the roses, the tulips, flowers, or whatever kind of flower you want to put it, represents lives that are no longer here. That's why I put the beautiful flowers there, red and yellow. You're coating that by the schoolhouse, and just before she goes in the classroom, Music Man and his girlfriend. More music. I love music. What can I tell you? It's done with a dry brush. It looks like charcoal, but it's dry brush and acrylic paint. Abstract music. Well, right here. This one is very special. It's done 2003. I started painting 1998 because of a little boy that felt like he couldn't do a whole lot. And we started doodling together, which is my grandson, who is now 34. This is a piece of a quilt that I found in my mother's things. Remember I said she's born in 1893? That stayed around all those years. And these are her little stitches. I turned it on the opposite side so you could see the stitches that she did. And the threads, by the way, are threads that was recycled from the feed sack. And she put it into the quilt. People threw away little to nothing then. If it was today like it was then, we would not have global warming as much, because you would have used something over and over again to make sure that it's necessary to be used in order to keep going. And you always see a mother, or no, the father actually, with the child held high. I put the lady there because we are honoring her a city girl sitting on the stoop, and you remember all of the pigeons that used to be the nuisance all around, and that red bird as well, bathing in that old tub by that old heater in the kitchen. That's it.
You know, neighborhoods.
I talked about the other piece that is just a slave woman coming from the continent. But this one I did early. This was one of my very first pieces. And the frame around it is tattered, and I left it there because the gentleman who did it was an elderly man that lived in Rock Hill, and he wanted so much just to contribute. So this for me will always be around it as long as I own it. This one is called Song of a Slave, Psalms 102. Her head is still held high because her dignity is still there, although she's been stripped of so many things. A little girl came in here one day, and I was here, and she was 9. And she said, "Why does this woman have these on her?" And I looked at her parents and I said, "You have a brilliant child, and you're gonna have to stick by her." I said, "If you don't mind, I'm gonna tell her the truth." I said, "My people came here in these chains on their feet and hands." And I said, but she still held her dignity. And that's why her head is high. She's not so pretty, but she has her dignity. And then I looked at the parents and I said, and you're going to have to talk to her this weekend, because if she shares what I'm going to tell her with her friends, somebody's going to not be as kind to her maybe. And I went on to tell her that this represents the ocean, that a lot of people didn't make it to this country. But this is an old woman, grandma's looking up at her and proud to know that she made it long enough to become a senior, and watching her on that chopping block. And the chains are so tight that plasma is running onto the chopping block. And that's why I said a song of a slave, Psalms 102. This one I didn't do. This one I did when I came back from Ghana. I thought about the people whose lives had made it here, those who did not make it, and I thought about what the gentleman told us when we were in Ghana. And then I thought about one time she was a mother going about her daily duties with a little baby on her back, her urn on her head, just walking, going, doing what mothers do. But coming to that ship, they call it a castle, that was purchased by the Portuguese. And when she stepped on that ship, she had clean water pouring into the ocean. And then as it hit that door of no return, you see the plasma representation of the red there and dripping into that door. And see how beautiful the sea is through that window. But this represents those people whose lives were lost, not even getting onto the ship, but lost before they even left the country, with splashes of plasma. Because you got to remember, we all have plasma in our bodies, and it's red. And that's what that represents, that ship of no return. This piece, the person that traveled to Ghana with me loves this piece. It's interesting for me because the people would go out to sea, and when you see that other boat, you could barely see it way out in the sea. They prepare to go out Mondays, and they fix the nets, and they sit diligently on a piece of log that they hand make their boats with. They don't have electrical equipment to make their boats with. And they take those boats that they chisel out with a hammer and whatever small hand instrument they use, and they go way out into the sea at night and stay out all night until about 2 o'clock in the evening, and the boats will start coming in closer and closer, and people from different villages and families, a member, it's usually a boy, will dive down into the water and pull that rope that's about this big all the way to the shore, and these guys here start immediately pulling, and the rope is so big they can't pull it like this. They pull it like that and put one hand here and one there, and they rock back and forward till they get it to shore, and the women immediately bend down and fill up the pan, and it's so heavy that when they have to get it on the head, 2 women, one on each side, will get it and put it on that woman's head, and she'll walk proudly down like a model all the way to the market to have it smoked or just to sell it in a big old sack. These women are doing the same thing. When that other boat comes in, they'll be ready. They'll reach down, get that fish out of the net, put it in that pan, and immediately 2 women. It's almost like clockwork, and everything that I've seen there is done in some kind of a rhythm. They almost have a rhythm to everything. The men rocking that, pull that rope, the women reaching down to pick up that heavy pan, and the pan is about like this. I've seen them walk with 2 of those 18 bottles cases on their head, just as high and with their head back like a queen walking in sand back to wherever they're going.